This
This is
bullshit.
how we do. All right, welcome, people, to another episode of the Regeneration Podcast. I'm Michael Martin here with my partner, Mike Sauter. How's it going, Mike?
Very good. Friday, fun day Friday, free at last. Whatever those blue collar songs they blast on the radio at noon. One of our radio stations has a good fun Friday song.
Yeah, grow up in Detroit, man. You know what that's like.
Yeah.
So what's new? Anything good?
I'm trying to think. Right before September, I'd been doing campus ministry and some work in funeral homes, and my bishop called and just asked if I'd run the local parish again. I don't know if I've mentioned it in a podcast. So I had about a week's notice and assumed I'm a layperson. There's a canonical, I don't know, canon law, let's say 214.7, where a layperson kind of runs a parish.
That's a Catholic thing to say.
Well, everybody else who's had this role knows it. I'm institute according to 214.7, something like that. But it's 5 rural parishes in Livingston County, New York, south of Rochester. And they're rural, and it's kind of getting them. I had done it for 8 years previous. Then I worked over at the Trappist Abbey of the Genesee, running the retreat houses. Now I'm back at it, and it's different. I got to see parish life leadership, what was going on. It was a snapshot. Then you're kind of freed up for it. And I worked 6 years in a monastery, now back in the thick of it. And I'm finding poetry in the whole thing. I'll have reports from the front, but it's been 2 months and it's been a whirlwind. Some of the good things are that when I was first assigned, I was the first I'm not even ordained a deacon, but the non-priest leader. So I kind of held my cards. You're worried about how you're perceived. And now I'm never a forceful leader, but this time, because I'd been in the role, I feel kind of, and I was invited to come back. I feel that, with some of the stuff we talk about, Michael, let's hope God grants the possibilities to actually do something with a Catholic parish. We're so isolated. I always say that instead of fighting for roles in the liturgy, being a layperson, I can represent the 2,000 plus square miles in our parish outside the church building and all those hours in the week outside the Catholic Mass. And that gets to the project of regeneration. Many of my peers around the country, non-priests, were in this role. They find it's the liturgy wars. What role can they have on the altar? And I'm just like, let it go. I don't need to anything like that. So it's a new development for me.
Keep your cassock. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly.
Yeah.
And we've been so isolated from even those other symbols, Catholic hospitals, Catholic schools. In our county, it's like Catholic charities. We even offshore all that stuff. That the Catholic faithful have now been so circumscribed to think that their whole identity is that 1 hour in that one building. And when that's what people are focused on, it's really hard to get to create a culture where so people can see there's so much more for us to do if we can just wake up.
Funny you should mention symbolism, Mike, because one of my projects this last week, I have been, it's kind of fits in with what you just said. I've been tanning lambskins.
I saw that online. You always post good pictures. You said it was super heavy.
When it was wet, I couldn't. It probably weighed 80 pounds. The one when it was heavy. It was so that. But they only when they're not heavy, when they're not wet, they only weigh, I don't know, a pound or two. Not much.
Have you already eaten the lamb?
Not the whole thing. Or it's 2 of them. It was 2 of them. So I'm working on that. And also, speaking of symbolism and the Catholic thing, we're here to talk today about, amongst other things, with Jonathan Geltner, author of this Absolute Music, just came out recently in the summer, I believe it was. And we'll also talk about the new Jesus the Imagination, number 6, Flesh and Spirit, which came out as a much heavier thing than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And Jonathan is many, many things. He's a brilliant translator of poetry, and he has a great translation of Paul Claudel's 5 Great Odes that Angelico Press put out 2 years ago, John? 3?
Yes, summer of 2020.
Gosh, yeah.
I gotta imagine that selling pretty well.
Summer, yeah.
Is that selling pretty well, Jonathan?
It's a relative.
It is.
Well.
It is.
Talk about. I think it
It could be worse.
attracted some attention in Catholic circles, sort
Okay.
of self-describing Catholic circles. In the wider poetry world, I don't think it's really been noticed particularly. That is as much a problem with the publishing world, I would say. I work as an editor too, and yeah, I don't know. It's partly a publishing world issue, but also a bigger cultural issue with a sort of lack of receptivity or interest in anything that is rather obviously trading in the symbolic, which of course traditional Catholic Christianity does. And Claudel's imagination is completely formed by that way of thinking. So I don't know how much interest would ever accrue around something like Claudel's 5 Great Odes in the culture at large. But
it's shifting, right? This Jonathan Pajot, who we'll have on, he's just using the word symbolism this podcast.
It's true. Yeah.
That it is growing. It is growing.
There is very much. It's still kind of a, sorry, I have to eat a cough drop to keep myself from coughing at you the whole time.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it is. And that's been interesting to me. Although it's quite chaotic, and there's a lot of new interest in sort of Jungian type stuff. Certainly Pajot is part of that, even though he's Orthodox Christian. But
Let me throw this in though. Now, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about anyway, and thanks for jumping right in. So you mentioned Claudel, right? And the first time, and I came late to Claudel. I mean, I could have been 40 already. I don't know. I was probably older than 40. And I was just blown away, not by necessarily the Catholicism of it, but by the imagination and the daring.
Yeah.
Which you also see, in, you see it in Eliot, you see it in a lot of those, one of my favorite poets, Brother Antoninus or William Everson, and there was something going on in Catholic or Anglo-Catholic or Christian poetry in the middle of the 20th century that seems completely atrophied to me now. I mean, since when we started Jesus the Imagination 6 or 7 years ago, 2016 was when the seed dropped. My ambition at that point was to get something that was, truly avant-garde Catholic or Christian poetry, and which I hope that at our best, that's what we've done. But yeah, there's this weird thing that's going on in Christian poetry that I think is contaminated by the kind of traditionalist movement. And that's people think to write this kind of Catholic poetry or something, it's all about sonnets. And I have had so many poorly written, poorly imagined sonnets sent to Jesus' Imagination for consideration. It's like when I first started teaching college, I'd come home and I'd tell my wife, just lock the kids in the basement. Civilization's coming to a crumble. It's over. So what do you think about that, John?
Well,
where is the imagination?
I'm married to a Catholic poet, so obviously
a very fine one.
I think the art is doing great. Well, no, look, I was officially, one of my hats I wore when I was in PhD school was the poetry and poetics guy, and back then I knew something about contemporary poetry, but I don't claim to be very abreast of the situation now. However, I would say that just a general thing that happened to poetry in our culture is that prose took over almost everything poetry traditionally did. And since I'm a prose writer, mainly myself, I don't have any particular guilt about that. But actually, it didn't need to be a zero-sum game. And I think poetry would be in a lot better shape if it was not actually just all lyric poetry. So Claudel, I mean, you can call the 5 Great Odes lyric poetry, it's fine. But it is long lyric poetry. This is big architectural forms. that he's working with there. And I mean, it's not epic poetry in a proper sense, but it's big scale. And in the 20th century, among the modernists and their heirs in the middle part of the 20th century, you see a total commitment to trying to write massive poetic forms. I mean, it's everywhere. Wallace Stevens has incredible long lyric poems. The Maximus poems of Charles Olson. Ezra Pound drove himself completely insane trying to write the cantos.
Literally,
of his life. Yeah, no, quite literally insane. Yeah. And T.S. Eliot is really quite concise, or at least he was after Ezra Pound edited him. But his form, his structures are really pretty big. It's everywhere, all the way up through. I mean, the latest one I'm familiar with is James Merrill's Changing Light at Sandover.
Yeah.
Which is this crazy Ouija
which Harold
but,
Bloom thought was one of the finest works of the late 20th century. Yeah.
I mean, he was a weird guy, but
he was weird.
Yeah. I like how Jonathan shrugged his shoulders on that one. Go.
It is an amazing poem. I mean, it's a book. It's a book-length poem, big book. But anyway, you see those things all over the place. Or Robert Bridges writing The Testament of Beauty, which I think is one of the great achievements in English poetry of the last 200 years. No one reads it; it's out of print. But those, poetry has that scope, and it seems to me that for about the last 2 generations, most poets have not attempted that. There have been some attempts at it. They haven't been very successful, to my mind. But that would be one way for poets to recover something of the stature that the art formerly was recognized to have, was if they didn't shy away from narrative poetry, dramatic poetry, and also the lyric forms that are much bigger, like Claudel's Odes. Claudel's Odes actually become basically dramatic poetry. That's it is, but it's also drama. I mean, he wrote these dramas, and that's a close cousin to the odes there. So if poetry would get ambitious in that way, I think it would be
interesting,
a good thing. The problem is you can't, I mean, the publishing world is up to the neck in presses and journals that will publish collections of short lyric poems, individual lyric poems, but finding someone who will publish or take on a really massive poetry project like that is much more challenging. And
why do you think that is?
Zero readership. Do I think attention span problems? I'm not. You answer, John, but it's just. Could you imagine getting a young person to tackle something like that takes sustained effort? We talked about Blake. Who's going to tackle Jerusalem?
Well, people have attention spans to get it through a novel, don't they? I mean, I think.
Well, novels are shorter than they used to be too. I mean, partly it comes from the sort of institutionalization of the art. So you have to publish in order to get your creative writing job. And the way to do that is to publish a bunch of little things.
Interesting.
You can publish dozens and scores of individual lyric poems if they're short little things. And so when you go to write up your bio or in your CV, it looks like you're this colossus. You've got all these entries, these items in there. Whereas if you've got like one epic poem thing or book-length poem, it's like, okay, well, how come your name doesn't appear in 57 top journals or whatever? And
so it's the professionalism that's
I think, and the same thing happens on the fiction side with short stories a bit. Nobody actually wants to read short stories, and you can't hardly you couldn't publish like a collection of short stories,
which is interesting because again, by the middle of the 20th century, the short story was almost the American art form in letters, right?
Yeah, it's very much a product of I should say its dominance is a fruit of the American originated creative writing academic system. But obviously there were short stories before that. It's an ancient form. It's just that as realist fiction, as like a collection of things, it's it's a little bit more modern. I mean, but I think the real readership is for novels, for unified book length works, whether it's prose or in fact poetry, if poetry could recover that. Because I think that's why you read. You bother to read something because you want to get immersed and sunk into something that's as big as a book. And to just be distracted by, a poem here, a poem there, is these days too similar to just like scrolling on social media or watching a TV show or something. To me anyway, I try to often think about, like, what is it about reading itself that is unique? What does reading offer that nothing else does? Because it has a lot of competing media now. Gaming, TV are the two main ones. And then what do specific genres offer that nothing else does? What does a novel have to offer you, or fiction have to offer that poetry doesn't? And I have my own weird answers to these questions, but that's what I try to think about.
Do you think that some of it is the at least a contributing factor, if we take the brain hemispheric thing again, from like the more literal left brain over to the more poetic right brain, that the novel still, it can hang over here at one level. People might not get to the deeper levels. There might just be the story. I like to get lost and escape. Versus, that the computers, the same John Sullivan we mentioned, he was saying that computers, they work on what we would call the left brain, that it allows the more feminine, intuitive, poetic side to atrophy. But conversely, it hypertrophies the left brain. And so, when you're saying they're still publishing a lot of these books of short poems, I'm just doing a surface level culture studies thing. We have a short attention span, but are people even reading those books, or do we like to collect poetry because they're like feathers in our cap?
Poets read them.
And of course, we're not going to read the long ones because, again, the right brain is atrophied and nobody could possibly go into that.
I mean, it's a specialized art form at this point. It's kind of,
it's like jazz.
It's like classical music or jazz or opera or something. The people who are involved in the art, one way or the other, read or participate.
Yeah, right.
But the people, regular people, don't. Whereas with prose fiction, it's not the case. Or at least with novels, actual regular people you might run into on the street do in fact still read novels.
And
they do.
Yeah.
Fiction.
And you can make a novel into a movie, and you can't make a poem into a movie.
Yeah, although I'd love to see a movie of like the Do We Know elegies.
Yeah.
Wait, it's called Wings of Desire.
Wings of Desire is basically, yeah. But look at, I think that's a great example. And this, when I saw Wings of Desire, we should probably do a show on that one day. I saw it when it came out at the Detroit Film Theater because it was not showing in, media, cinemaplexes, and it's completely blown away. But that I had no idea you could make a movie like this. It was so poetic, and it was so life affirming at the same time, while acknowledging, the travails and.
But do you know why that movie's so brilliant? Because it's really a novel. You have all the thoughts of the characters. You have the Homer character, and you hear him talking, and you have Marianne thinking in French and speaking German because she's in Berlin, and that's what a novel does. I go on about
and
this.
I agree, and I think that's what we see in because I just did it this week with students. We're talking about they never know what to do. I don't know what to do with this project, Professor Martin. And like, just do something, I base it on something, I tell them, like, if you read interviews with the Beatles, what they were doing, they were imitating Buddy Holly or Elvis or whomever, right? And as Salvador Dali said, I became myself by imitating Missonier. Right. So
Chesterton said, if your first novel, sounded like Dickens, that's great. If your second one did, you're a failure. Right. But of course, it's the same point, that you begin by imitating. And I
told them about, because they don't really have literature courses that much anymore. So I told them about Ulysses being based on the Odyssey. And I played them. There's a film clip of they made a film of Ulysses. I don't know if it's any good. I've only seen this clip of the end of Molly Bloom's soliloquy, which is fantastic. It's just it's profoundly moving, and students, I had some of them even in tears. But those high modernists, we're talking about, and we can, you can talk, Joyce is part of this, right? And that there was such daring that was going on in the arts at that time, that I don't know, did they breathe new life into the novel? And that's, again, going back to when I started Jesus Imagination, was what I wanted to capture. I wanted to find something in letters that was not only avant-garde, but profoundly meaningful, like Wings of Desire, or like, in fact, John said he's not really a poet. Oh yes, he is. And I was looking for it. It must be in the Garden issue, which I don't have at hand. Your poem about meeting Christ, the dream about
the dream
Christ.
of Jesus when he's 29. Yeah,
that's a fantastic
when I
poem.
was 29.
That's one of my favorite things.
I'll
I've
look
published.
for it.
Seriously, one of my favorite things that I've had, and one that stuck with me of all the different things that have been in Jesus Imagination, that one's really stuck with me.
Let me try to bring together, before we go on to a different subject, if we do, but I think I've got something that brings together Claudel, symbolism, Jesus, the imagination, the word, the imagination, right? If we're plugging this journal at all, imagination can mean many things. But at one level, for me, I've always thought one of the things that probably hurts poetry reading and so forth is, and I festered on this on the pages of Front Porch Republic, and I think twice in Michael's journal, I had an article in one on love, I guess, or marriage, on Grail and anti-Grail quests. But I've always thought that one working definition of the imagination, if we need to get people launched, two working definitions. One would be putting yourself into another person's place, right? The idea that to just once in your life, like the Grail quest, what are you going through? The other one related is, to me, you have this notion that something about the infinite expanses of outer space, for me, is like a stink bomb to the imagination. We can be big in the universe or small in the universe. Seeing it both ways is the imagination. But we have, at least for the 20th century, we have this wild conspiracy, this bias to see one side of the equation, that, a quote to Stephen Hawking, you're pond scum in a universe that just doesn't give a shit about you. Anyhow, Paul Claudel saw through this. I have a quote from him that said, and again, Paul Claudel was an imaginative genius. I wonder where that comes from. But he said the whole 19th century was persuaded that creation was infinite, that beyond this world lay others, innumerable others, all populated with intelligent souls and creatures, perhaps superior to us. And then Claudel continues, he goes, there's no conception more foolishly vertiginous, more deleterious for the imagination, and more thoroughly demeaning for our dignity. So I've always sensed that thing, and I find it, that Owen Barfield looked at C.S. Lewis, and he said, my friend Jack is obsessed with these stupid phrases like Sirius the Dog Star is 1.5 gazillion trillion miles away. And Barfield wondered, what is C.S. Lewis doing? Where does this take us when we fester on idiotic things like that? And I think the imagination, again, Jonathan Swift, he went to one island where he was big, another island where he was small. The quote you can take from Gulliver's Travels is what he learned from that, is he said, it helped me put myself into other people's shoes. It helped his imagination. But Michael and I have had a show on William Blake, who coined the term imagination. And we know this kind of imaginative force is also a very outward going force that can maybe redeem the universe. But I thought, I couldn't, talking about Claudel, the last time I dove into Claudel, and I think I was in correspondence with a scholar at Oxford about him, about this stuff. But again, he saw through this ruse that we've just been downloaded into us, that you're pond scumming in the universe. Thomas Mann saw through this ruse, and it's in every one of his novels. I can find a section where he devotes to this in The Magic Mountain, certainly Dr. Faustus. But, we need to see it both ways. So that's, I got on my soapbox. I'm getting off my soapbox.
If anyone wants to follow that line of thought in his odes, the one to read is the last one, the fifth ode, which is called The Closed House. And
that's the one you have published, right? With Jesus, the Imagination, the fifth ode?
Michael Martin will have to answer that.
I think it is. I can look it up. Yeah.
I think it's actually the fourth one. I think it's actually the fourth one that was in there. But Claudel has this weird, well, it strikes me as weird. It's unfamiliar to us anyway. This way of talking about the universe as closed, as perfected, as finished, it's finite. And
I don't like that either, to be honest with you, I guess. Just shooting from the hip. Go.
Well, the reason he's talking in that way, it's a very metaphysical way. I mean, I guess he is able to imaginatively perceive within creation, which is in a constant state of flux and becoming or passing away, as the Bible puts it. He's also able to perceive within it its eschatological perfection at any given moment, anywhere. And that's you could call that his sophiological or sophianic vision, or there's various ways you could describe it. But and if you just look at this universe as we now, as contemporary cosmologists do, then yeah, it's whatever astronomical figures and facts. And you can't, I don't think you can undo that knowledge. We can't just like forget that the actual cosmos is as large as our scientific inquiry.
But I want to interject here, but what we still can do with, again, you go to a site called Scale of the Universe. I did it with a student the other day, that they to what we know, they go out as far as they can and they go down as small as we can to the Planck length in the known universe. And then the interesting thing is when you have to measure it, man, there's always the stick figure in the middle to get some reference point. But you can say, to what scientists know right now, we're bigger than the smallest thing we know, than we are smaller than the biggest thing we know. But even when you get down to the Planck length, they represent it as a shape, and then you bring in Zeno. You could whack it up into a million different parts.
Yeah,
or again, both ways.
There's no way to. It's and it does go back to Zeno, but I don't think. I mean, Pascal famously said that the cold depths of the abyss terrified him. He couldn't imagine anything more fatal to like warm, wholesome human thought and culture than speculating on the outer cosmos. Who just actually published something about this? Amazingly, hero of my boyhood, William Shatner.
Really?
I saw that.
By God's grace, still among us on this earth. He's like 90 something now.
Yeah, and he took that travel with that Jeff Bezos's plane, or
right. Well, he went up on Bezos's rocket. And he wrote this thing just recently in some publication that I never read.
I did see it too. It's great. I was cheering.
And he's like, what I saw out there when I looked out the window was death. It's just like, it was not inspiring. It was just horrifying, and it was this cold, death-filled vacuum, or what it made sense. That did not make sense. But it's this beautiful thing, and he says what it actually did though was cause me to redirect my attention to the earth, to see the earth where we actually live and exist with meaning in a new way. And he's not religious, he's Jewish by background, but you could turn that into a religious movement, as Kierkegaard might have called it, and sort of repurpose the horror of the cold, dark abyss to sort of provide some bulwark to a more Sophianic vision of the one corner of the cosmos that we do actually know experientially. And I don't know. It's I do think we talk a lot about these days about reenchantment and trying to live in a cosmos. And I do think that one of the greatest hindrances to that, there's two hindrances to it. One is that we only want enchantment to be good. We don't want to acknowledge that necessarily entails the diabolical, the haunted.
Brilliant insight. Yeah. The underworld.
And then the other is that we're never going to be able quite to get back to the sort of Ptolemaic universe and have the music of the spheres. And I mean, my novel is kind of about a guy who's haunted by this fact. And it's not available. You can't go back. You can't unknow things that way. And so C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy is an amazing thing that I love those books. I love Lewis, but there is just something fundamentally flawed about that space trilogy in that it it got disproven by spaceflight, which happened like right after he published the book. I mean, it's just like we've actually been to Venus, and we've actually traveled interplanetary travel, and we know that it's not full of the way he writes it is like the space between the Earth and Venus, or the Earth and Mars, the two planets that they visit in that trilogy, is like not just a cold vacuum at absolute zero being shot through with like solar radiation that would kill you instantly if you were exposed to it directly. It's like some kind of Dantean crystalline ether, and that's awesome. It's so beautiful and poetic, but I don't see how any modern person can possibly read that and be like, that's really cool, and also just we know to be false. And so it's a danger you run into if you try to I don't know, I guess blend fantasy and realism in a unworkable way or something. But he's so much, I mean, Lewis is just a wonderful example of a very modern person, which I think he was, who so much wanted to be able to inhabit again that late medieval cosmos. And what I would like to find is a authentically modern way of doing that, instead of a somewhat naive or wish fulfilling way of thinking your way back into it.
That was great.
So that's a great place, Dante, Cosmos, to move into your novel. So absolute music. You don't have to unload the whole thing, but if you could tell our audience about the novel and give a little description, and then we can get into it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Gosh, it is, I have to admit, it
available from Slant Books and at all fine booksellers everywhere.
Right. If they don't have it, they're not a fine bookseller. It's that simple.
We have one in Geneseo. If they don't have it, I'm burning the place down.
That's right.
I'm gonna hear from the YouTube people.
All we need is another reason to close small bookstores, right? That's the last one remaining in Rochester. But if they don't have your book, I'm saying, we need Barnes and Noble.
Serious about their books, man.
Yeah.
So the Absolute Music is a first person novel. It's written in the voice of a guy who writes fantasy, modern genre fantasy, and he's a learned and digressive and sort of speculative guy. And he's at this very Dantean age of 36. Well, it's actually 36 in the book, middle 30s, the middle of life's way. And the main storyline tracks 1 year from the autumn to the autumn of 2017 to 2018. So there are some historical events that are reported in the book. Bad events, terrible events.
Yeah.
Church sex abuse crisis.
The McCarrick scandal.
The summer 2018 scandals in the Catholic Church, and then the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh in October of 2018. And MacPhail is torn between his Jewish and his Jewish heritage and his Catholic. He's a Catholic convert. And I think maybe I'll actually read in a minute the part where he talks about his baptism. Anyway, he goes through a kind of crisis. He's a new father, and he has a moral failure. But the book is
moral failure, meaning he cheats on his wife, right?
Yeah, he commits adultery, and that adultery is bound up with his larger just sort of loss of faith in an enchanted world, which
existential problem.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fantasist. He writes fantasy because he wants to experience the world as enchanted. He wants to live in this kind of cosmos, like we were just talking about. And at this stage of his life, post conversion, when he's becoming a father, he loses that ability. I mean, he'd managed to find his way into it at one point, but he loses it, at least temporarily. And it's, if it were likened to Dante, it would only be like maybe the first third or half of the Divine Comedy. He doesn't get all the way out at the end, but
Doesn't get to paradise, but he sees it.
no,
Yeah.
he's on the way. He's maybe on the way up by means
But
of recuperating.
and before you read, I just love the novel, and for me, you know, I'm a bit older than you are, so watching what MacPhail was going through in his mid-30s, I mean, basically what I was going through in my mid-30s, right? Which I think we all do. And what came to mind as I was reading it is, and as Dante was going through in his mid-30s, right? And Rudolf Steiner has these different categories of different levels of soul that people go through. So the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, the ego that comes in, then the intellectual soul, which is the journey from about 21 to 35. But after that comes the consciousness soul, which is exactly what I was thinking about as I was reading through the novel. I was like, this is just absolutely consciousness soul. And I want to read this description from Owen Barfield's Romanticism Comes of Age of what the consciousness soul is. It's relatively short. That human consciousness is perpetually evolving was, of course, Steiner's perpetual theme. And he often described this particular stage of it, which I have tried to depict, as the ego developing in the consciousness soul. The consciousness soul indicates the maximum point of self-consciousness, the point at which the individual feels himself to be entirely cut off from the surrounding cosmos, and is for that reason fully conscious of himself as an individual. He has attained complete self-consciousness at the cost of practically everything else. It is easily distinguishable from the intellectual soul, an earlier stage of development, in which, though clearly discerning itself from perceptible objects over against it in space, the ego still feels its words and thoughts to be part of itself. In the Middle Ages, the ego was still working in the intellectual soul. And Steiner talked about, you know, this in a way is the age of the consciousness soul, right? Yeah. And his project was too, like you were saying, John, was not to go back to the Middle Ages, but to go forward to what Nicholas Berdyaev would call the new Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't go home again, right?
Right. Yeah. That's great, Michael. Thanks. I love to hear that brought to bear on the novel, because a term that was new to me when I was in the MFA program, which is where I started writing the novel, was this thing called a novel of consciousness. One of my supervisors who oversaw the beginning of that novel project that would become Absolute Music said I was writing a novel of consciousness, and I hadn't heard it before. And I find it to be a rich term, and I understand it in various ways. It really would map on very well to what you read from Barfield. And so I was up to that in that Absolute Music. The narrator, MacPhail, he just calls himself MacPhail. And there's some etymology behind that. It's a family name of his, but it's not his real name, his real surname, but it's the name he publishes under. And MacPhail is absolutely, so to speak, fallen into this phase, this consciousness where he's cut off from the world and even his own wife and family, and it's a problem, obviously.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really know how to get out of it, except, so I mean, I don't want to give away the end of the book in detail, but I would say that if there's a suggestion at the end that he is on his way toward getting out of this terrible sort of quagmire that is hypertrophied consciousness that has just become so learned and clever about itself and about everything else, but is unable therefore to live immediately, to feel real presence. It's through the beginning of a recuperation of a kind of heritage that for MacPhail is coming to him through his Jewish side. I won't launch into that side of the book, but it's in there. The one of the sort of dominant intellectual figures who helped guide the construction or composition of that book was Franz Rosenzweig, this 20th century philosopher, German Jewish man who he was a friend of Eugen Rosenstock-Huessy, and who was also a German Jew who converted. Rosenzweig was going to convert and then didn't.
We should do a show on Rosenzweig too, by the way. Footnote.
Yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
He's fascinating
Totally.
figure. I absolutely love his work and just sort of the story of his life, which was tragically short and painful. But anyway, Rosenzweig was what in Judaism is a Baal Teshuva, a master of return. He recuperated his Judaism and devoted his life. He could have been a great academic. Well, actually, eventually he died in 1929, and eventually his academic career would have been foreshortened or else gone into exile when the Nazis came to power. Right. But anyway, he could have gone that route, but he didn't. He devoted himself to running this thing called the Lehrhaus in Frankfurt, and basically just poured his life's work into trying to help the Jewish community recover its roots and rediscover itself and find an authentically modern way to be Jewish, because these are totally modern people. These are consciousness soul people, these modern intellectual Germans.
Yeah.
So he had this profound religious experience on Yom Kippur in 1913 that he decided, no, I won't be Christian. I think a famous line attributed to him is, "How can I convert who was born chosen?" But anyway, he wanted Christians to be Christian though as well. So his whole idea on the Star of Redemption is Judaism and Christianity are two essential components of a single mechanism.
I was going to say there's like centrifugal and centripetal forces the way they play off in Star of the World. Yeah.
It's really it's a beautiful vision of how the two religions can or are even intended to work together. So he presides over the book.
Speaking of beautiful visions, why don't we have you read a passage from the book, John?
That's a great idea, because I just put a cough drop in my mouth. So
I'll talk for a minute while you're working.
No, it's okay.
No, I was going to say, one of the things you were saying earlier was when you're talking about this need to escape, that some people feel in consciousness, so the retreat to the past. And there's a moment in the novel where MacPhail gets together with his old friends in his mid-30s to play Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Oh yeah,
which is kind of symbolic of that.
That's great. Yeah,
it's a whole chapter. It's a whole huge thing in the book. Yeah, I guess I should plug it that way, or pitch it, or what am I trying to say? Advertise my book that way. If you wanted to read a really literary novel that also has a huge section in it of a bunch of guys in their 30s drinking heavily all day and playing Dungeons and Dragons, mine is the book for you.
This is your book.
My actor brother-in-law his Christmas gift is figured out this year. Yeah, New York City actor.
I mean, the rest of it is all like Wings of Desire and Franz Rosenzweig and Michael Ende, Never-Ending Story. But there's also Dungeons and Dragons in the middle.
It's got something for everybody.
Yeah,
ladies and gentlemen, if this is the novel for you.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean that's part of the one way you can talk about my book, I suppose, is to say that it's just a giant interrogation of the idea of fantasy. And I guess one of my basic convictions about the concept of fantasy is that there's good fantasy and there's bad fantasy. It's not intrinsically one or the other. And MacPhail has a lot of problems with fantasy that is either clearly bad in the form of like just lust, and the adultery, or fantasy that's ambiguous, that haunts and disturbs him. But he also has these moments of more visionary, wholesome fantasy. So the fantasy is just kind of this huge theme. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons is like a mode of fantasy. So, but I do wonder a lot about that. Gaming, just, I have a lot of thoughts and reservations about the phenomenon of gaming as it has become so.
These are all like episode after episode after episode. Like when you mentioned the phenomenon of gaming,
Okay.
we need to talk about that, you know?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I
They're also laden. Every sentence you offer, Jonathan, is so laden. Like I have various thoughts on fantasy. Like that's the whole world. There's a social criticism there. I can't
Yes.
wait to read the novel.
I only have the superficial. Everyone else has to chip in to go in depth.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, there's just many different moments where MacPhail reports, either like in that 1 year that's more just a few years ago, or that he remembers from his past, that are his various encounters with visionary or fantastical experiences or something like that. And one of them has to do with Wings of Desire, but there's some, but he also talks about how it relates to specific places. And so the book is very sort of obsessed or focused on places, certain places.
And maps, right?
And
The map
maps.
for MacPhail's desk, right? The map of
Yeah.
Cincinnati.
Yeah, he has these USGS maps, the Geological Survey maps. That would be something taken from my real life. I have this actual map.
I see one right behind you.
Yeah, there's one behind you.
Oh, well, that was actually my dad's in his
Oh, okay.
office while I was growing up. That's just no, I could show you them. They're right here, but I don't think they would see on the screen. They wouldn't come through very well. But they, yeah, he's obsessed with places. So by far the two places that are most prominent in the book are the cities of Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. But there are other places that bear significance for him. And of those, Ireland, or a particular region of Western Ireland, would be the most prominent. So, I mean, Michael, if you had wanted me to read from one of those parts of the book,
That would be great.
I'd be happy to. All right,
Go right ahead.
I kind of want to do like two parts. There's two sections of the book that take place there. And the first one is in a dream that MacPhail has on Christmas, or Christmas Eve, I guess. And it's very long, and I won't read anything like the whole of it. But in this dream, he's walking down the coast of the Loophead Peninsula in Western Ireland with an old friend that he's not friends with anymore, at least at that time in the novel, named Joel Stein, who's a Jewish guy, all Jewish, unlike MacPhail, who's half Jewish. And they walk together down the coast and they eventually end up in Mount Brandon, Knockbrennan, which is not in Loophead. It's on the other side of Tralee Bay and the Shannon. But I'm not going to read quite that far to the ending of it. And I won't read the beginning of it either. But there's MacPhail is also this super learned guy. It's a problem. It goes back to the consciousness soul stuff. He knows all this stuff, and he can't keep himself from like digressing and talking about it in this essayistic way. And the novel really pushes the boundary between novel and essay. So even though he's reporting this like totally bizarre visionary dream, he also goes on these like etymological digressions and stuff. And they seem to happen. I wasn't really thinking about this, but they seem to happen in Ireland, especially. So we'll have a bit of Irish here anyway. Maybe there would be some things that don't make sense because of the rest of the story, but I'll just read the part about the nature of certain places in Ireland and the kind of world that MacPhail's pining for.
Okay.
A few minutes walk farther down the high coast is all a dream. Joel paused us again, this time turning his gaze inland to Tovar Kia, the holy well dedicated to Saint Kia, or Key as it's poorly anglicized, so K-E-E, but the Irish spelling there is C-A-O-I-D-H-E, Kia. The name intrigues me for its indeterminate verbal root, which may have to do with blindness, lamentation, or even paths. So I've often joked to Q, that's MacPhail's wife, that Key is the patron saint of those who go lamenting down the pathways of the blind, or the blind who walk in the ways of lamentation, or those who lament their blindness as they struggle to follow the way. All over the countryside of Ireland are to be found in abundance two kinds of ruin, holy wells, tovracha, and what are known variously as ring forts or fairy forts. In Irish, they're called rachana, which means the circular embankments themselves, or lisana, which denotes the enclosed spaces. And so these are enclosures of earthen mounds or hedges in ring shape, sometimes quite large and set within each other concentrically. They are usually left untended, whatever grows on them uncut, for to meddle here is to invite otherworldly interference. They are artifacts of human culture, not that of fairy, built and occupied from the Bronze Age through the early medieval period. But it's as if the assumption came naturally and worked itself out in folk idea, that when humankind no longer cares for these earthen ramparts, they should become the province of the world behind the world, its strongholds and gateways. Keys Well is in the middle of a fairy fort. Usually these wells are thought to cure some ailment, and that Keys Well, the water is supposed to help the eyes. Around and around the inside of the ring of hedge, Joel and I walked, seeing over the hedge the cattle in the pasture land and the larks overhead, or the jagged shore of Clare, tilting away and crashing into the sea. The raised earth of the fairy forts reminds me of the sinuous mounds built by Native Americans in the valleys of the Ohio that so fascinated me as a boy. Always an uncanny feeling would come over me by those worn green edifices, and I felt the same thing now at Keys Well. Eventually, Joel put his hand on my elbow and guided us away from the ring to the little structure like a miniature chapel that housed the well in the center. The structure is simple, whitewashed, a small cross on top. You can hardly go inside, the floor being mostly the open face of the well. The interior walls bear a crucifix draped by a rosary, icons, a few votive candles, and other paraphernalia, all left there over many years, but none of it of recent devotion, and I don't know when the last Pattern Day would have been celebrated at Keys Well. In the strange imposition of English upon Ireland, patron, as in a patron saint, morphed into pattern, as if the communion of saints, in this case Ireland's local legendary saints with one foot in fairy, were coordinates on a vast holy map of the island. Joel caused us to kneel before the well and spoke again about stories, something about one true story that makes valid all storytelling. And he was saying something about marriage, the marriage of complementary spirits, spirit of God and spirit of place, the holy person and the holy place. The word of God, he may have said, is a true window on the world, yet fragile. Oh, how it is threatened, a marriage dying away, a passion spent, love misconstrued, something like that. And Joel was warning me that if the marriage of the Spirit of God and the Spirit of place were broken, then language itself would be broken and there could be no more story. I was mystified and annoyed by this and made to rise from the well, but Joel bade me first drench my eyes in the water, and I did. As I washed my eyes, I began to weep because I could make no prayer and felt no faith. And then, whatsoever faith shall safeguard this earth and all her times and weathers, that shall endure, Joel said as he stood and I stood next to him. And whatsoever faith shall waste this earth, even that shall be swept from off the face of this earth, nor shall the earth remember that falseness any more than the maker of the earth and all her times and weathers remembers the sin of the repentant man. Then I followed Joel away from Keys Well and out of the fairy fort, and we walked on down the coast. There were other fairy forts on higher ground inland, and everywhere the scent of dung and turf fires in the air. Always we could hear the sound of the sea, cold and beating on a broken shore. When at last we came to the end of Loophead, Joel pointed over the water to a distant mountain peak glaring over the waters and said, when there are no more stories, it is time to float. And with that, we stepped off the cliff and walked across the air over the mouth of the Shannon and Tralee Bay, and soon found ourselves at Sleehead on the coast of Corca standing where the skirts of Knockbrennan come down to the sea. All right, so that's all in a
Beautiful.
dream, obviously. Walking over the ocean. And there's a good deal more about Ireland in there. Thoreau gets quoted along with John Scotus Erigena, or however people say that guy's name. at the top of the mountain.
There we go.
I have
Very
heard
good.
various ones. Arugula, or
There's absolutely no consensus.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
I'd like to say Arugula
Yeah,
myself.
I like that one too.
But that's not. Yeah, I don't know.
You know that guy. Yeah,
I have no authority. I know.
that Irish guy.
He was a good guy. Good
My
guy.
buddy at the bar.
Yeah.
Arugula.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's fairly early in the novel, and it's all part of this insane, huge, long dream sequence that MacPhail has. And
I think it gives our listeners too, Jonathan, a sense that you're definitely playing with the very marrow of the stuff that we're trying to do on this podcast, Regeneration Podcast, right?
good.
And you're if they were dream images, yeah, they're dream images, but the notion of using springs, water, air, you're freeing all these up, and that they're the very stuff of what the symbolic, when we were talking about the symbolic world to begin with, it's the very stuff of what we need for sure.
Yeah,
I have not read the novel, and I'm not lying. I'm guaranteed, meeting you, guaranteed to read it because I found that very captivating. And
thanks.
if for nothing else, the Dungeons and Dragons scene too.
Yeah, I wish I could read that, but it's got 5 guys talking, and it's actually written like in a play format.
Yeah.
So it would be difficult for me to read it.
I've seen some group sketch comedy start to play on that more because there's obviously so much material. And I forget where I was. I have a son-in-law, my oldest daughter's husband, who showed us some great sketch comedy of guys playing D&D. And I thought, whoa, this has got to be the first of many because it's just rife for material.
There's I actually there's a group of New Zealand dudes who do this.
Okay. There's also live shows, right? Where we watch them play Dungeons and Dragons.
Is that true for D&D? I know that's
It
true.
is.
You can watch people do video gaming.
Yeah. No, it's true for D&D too.
Sport now.
Yep.
Which just fries my imagination. I can't.
Yeah.
But, anyway, yeah. So the D&D. I mean, look, I'm by no means MacPhail, but lots of things in the book are based on real experiences I've had. I had a very similar dream to that one in that exact place in Ireland, which I happen to know through connection with some Irish people.
Now, did you and Katie live there for a little while?
We didn't live there. We
stayed for a
We've
long.
had some extended stays there,
Okay.
Including Easter of 2016. Which, do you want me to read any more? I don't want to run out the clock. There's
No, go ahead. Yeah, I'd like to hear about the baptism.
Yeah, so MacPhail's later in the book, he relates how he was baptized in Ireland in Easter of 2016, and this is unlike that first passage, which was based on a real dream I had, or at least some of it. This is completely not my life, much as I might wish that it was. It's kind of dramatic, but anyway, MacPhail just recounts his baptism, his conversion, I should say. And just the thing to remember is Q is his wife, and that's actually an acronym, KEW. It's not her name. Okay. So like MacPhail, you don't ever learn her real name. And Annette, I'll mention
Katie.
Well, but it's not. She's very much not actually Katie at all.
I'm not sure about when I first encountered her in the book. I said, this sounds like Katie.
It does. But you know what? I'll tell you the secret.
John say it's not at all.
I'll tell you the secret origins of their names. So early in the book, MacPhail says that KEW is an acronym, and that it would be his wife's complete acronym before she changed her name when they married. So that means her maiden name is a W, and it means that MacPhail's real surname begins with a W. And I wrote a novel in about 2014, which I called The Comedy, Dante's title. I never published it. I made an effort to, and I never published it. But some people, real people out there in the world, have read this and can verify that it exists. I probably never will publish any version of it. But in that novel, there was a very important character named Catherine Winterhart, and the male character, the male protagonist, had the last name of Winestone. And so I actually thought of these two, MacPhail and his wife Q, as this guy Jesse Winestone and Catherine Winterhart, who were from my earlier novel. I took them from that abandoned work and used them at the center of this book. Just to give some insight to the ridiculous process by which fiction comes into
Yeah.
existence.
I know.
But that's what is behind the initials and all that stuff. But anyway, now you're going to hear about the name MacPhail briefly. McPhail. And then McFall is another name you'll hear sometimes that's related. But anyway, by the beginning of 2016, Q had brought me around emotionally to joining the Catholic Church, and teaching fiction and poetry showed me just how essential a Western, that is to say, largely Christian tradition was to my chosen art. It was almost as though if I were to be a writer, then I must be a Christian, and the most archaic and deeply rooted sort of Christian I could be. The roots of my words had to go far back and skip nothing along the way. I must be an incarnational writer if I would know and put on paper something of the union and beauty of body and soul. There was nothing, however, about the Christian religion in America that appealed to me in any form I had ever encountered. In America, Christianity struck me as a totally artificial, superficial, and usually hypocritical imposition, an alien and exploitative ideology grafted onto the land. But in Britain and Ireland, anywhere in Europe, things were different. More accurately, the landscape was different. And since rekindling our relationship shortly after Q's move to Chicago in the summer of 2011, Q and I had spent a portion of every year in England, visiting her friends there, and in Ireland, where, as I've stated, some of Q's distant relations owned an old cottage, which they let us use. Q was able to bring me around to joining the Catholic Christian religion, as distinct from merely entertaining it intellectually, because she was able to show it to me in Ireland, and there I was able to experience it as something out of doors, something sunk into the very rock and mixed with the tides of the Atlantic. In County Kerry, where Knockbrennan rises, she was acquainted with an old priest, an elder friend of her second cousin or some such connection. He was a wizard-like man, unlike any other priest I've ever met, Irish or not, who traipsed around Kerry smoking a pipe, and he was one of the few people there who still spoke any Irish. Persuaded by Q, this priest, though past the age of 80, agreed to baptize me in a peculiar but licit way in the early spring of 2016, with ice-cold water at the break of dawn in the ruins of Kilmalcater at the foot of Knockbrennan in Kerry. The name of the ruin is more accurately spelled something like Kilmalcater, with Cillmalcadeair. Irish orthography is miraculous. The Church of Malcader, a name meaning, well, what exactly? The Irish mal, or moil, a word appearing in what is supposed to be the original form of my mother's maiden name, MacPhail, denotes baldness or flatness, but in the early Christian period, it connoted a servant, perhaps in the sense of an ascetic who had taken the tonsure. As for cater, or some such word, it means the cedar tree. So Malcader was the servant of the cedar. For Jesus was said in legend to have been crucified on a cross. That would be the same Siegebaum or road mentioned in the second movement of this suite, made from the wood of a cedar. Sorry, there's some Old English in this book too, and he just quoted it. The man Malcader was supposed to have been originally from Ulster, perhaps not far from where the MacPhail, or rather the Malfowl, originated. As for the second part of Malfowl, it seems to be a word for traveling, roaming, journeying, fowl, that has perhaps the same meaning. It means perhaps a wandering scholar or monk. Malcader is supposed to have built his church jointly with St. Brendan. That building no longer stands, but perhaps some of its gray stones, color of Atlantic storm, are part of the ruin that is there, which dates from the 12th century. And so I had requested to join the church, to myself become a servant of the tree among the stones of Kilmalcader. After I was baptized, Q and I followed the path from the ruins to the top of Knockbrennan along the Stations of the Cross described in the dream I had of Joel Stein on Christmas Eve. What I found almost immediately upon returning to America, Chicago at that time, was that I no longer had any access to that elemental ancientness of Christianity, even though Q and I attended the most sumptuous and traditional church in the city. That was just the problem. It was in the middle of a giant American city, and like many Catholic churches in that city, It had been built in the ornate Polish cathedral style, as it's called, and this, unlike the gray Atlantic stone of Kerry piled into altar and temple, had nothing to do with anything in my heritage, and I felt that somehow. It was like going to church in a museum. But among those stones on the windswept fringe of Ireland, it wasn't like a museum. It was something original, mysterious, and ascetic. By the time of the scandal in August of 2018, after which, except for my daughter's baptism, I no longer wished to enter a church, I was probably looking for an excuse to beg off from the religion. At least I was in America. But I was left with the memories of my baptism in that primitive dawn at the limit of the old world. There was something in that moment to which I had to remain true, but I no longer knew what to do or how to do that, or how I could make it something that might be passed down to my children. So that's enough.
Beautiful. Beautiful. John.
Beautiful, really. Yeah.
Now-
and again, the listeners, you're playing with so many themes in that resonate. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, just, no, we haven't told the listeners this, but John and I are kin.
In the
So-
spirit.
The spirit.
Well, no, I mean, this is interesting. I mean, it really dawned on me as John was reading this that I know John and Katie because of Jesus the Imagination. Because Katie submitted a poem to the first Jesus the Imagination.
Oh, that's right.
And I only knew her via email. And that was when Marygrove College still existed, and I still had a real job.
Like, where did she see? I'm just curious, Michael. Where did she see the call for submissions?
I don't know. I have to ask her. I
That
don't
is
know.
a good question.
Yeah, I wonder where anybody saw it. I just
Yeah.
knew the guy. Yeah.
Nobody. I don't know. But
No idea.
and so that was 2016 or 2017, and I think it must have been 2018 when you entered the church, John.
17.
2017. Okay, so it was
Easter
26.
of
So yeah, so Jesus Imagination already come out, and or it was coming out, and I got an email from Katie, and she said, we're kind of new to Michigan, and my husband's coming into the church, and he likes he's read your books, and he likes what you have to think. Would you mind being his sponsor? I'm
That's
like,
great.
and I'm like, but we've never actually met.
Who cares?
I said, well, I know. I said when I wanted to, I said, well, can I do it by proxy? Because at the time, our priest was really ailing, and if I wasn't there on the altar, I was afraid he would collapse, which is actually pretty true. So I said, well, I can't. Can I do it by proxy? But then, if I'm going to do this, you guys have to come to our house for Easter dinner. And that's the first time I met John and Katie.
Yep.
It was on Easter dinner at my house at the farm in 2017.
What a great story.
It was. And ever since then, they've been like family to me. And so I'm reading this story about your baptism, and, and the whole world just kind of came together right for me,
Not my
right there at that
baptism.
moment. I know, but I'm
been
thinking about
cool.
your baptism in relationship with Phal's baptism.
Yeah.
And
I mean, mine was great. I was baptized at Old St. Mary's in Greektown in the middle of Detroit, but and I actually have no clue whatsoever if it is feasible. You want to bring a canon law again, Mike, and sort this out?
I think we're going to be talking about like 312.4927. But let's that's my prediction.
Star date. Just say star date before you
I
mention
don't. Yeah. Canon law date. Yeah. I have no clue if it's actually licit or possible to be licitly baptized, as McPhail reports in that passage I just read. It's when I thought of it, when I imagined
sounds good.
it sounded so good that I was like, the hell with this. I'm a novelist. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, St. Paul and the eunuch, right? You just get out and you throw water on the guy.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, he's a priest. It is a church.
Well, it's
Yeah.
licit. It's licit for anybody to baptize at any time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're good.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
good.
So I figured.
McPhail is good.
McPhail's good.
He's good with God. Like, yeah.
And so is we find your novel to be acceptable, but it won't be put on
It
the
does
index.
not have a.
We're not going to put it on the
or-
index.
or-
It's not going to be on the index according to 419.27972 pi.
I keep waiting for the Mandalorians have come in word.
Yeah.
So
Fascinating.
Well, the thing is, for me, this whole episode, my relationship with John, my relationship with you, Mike, because you were present when I conceived of Jesus the Imagination.
I
at the
was.
conference. So it's all
We got to
coming
make
together
clear
right
that
here.
this was an artistic conception, not type of some other conception.
That's right.
Mhm.
And
Immaculate.
it's
Yeah.
well,
It was immaculate.
yeah. So anyway, yeah. So this whole thing has just kind of come together for me, which is in a kind of a beautifully and mystical,
it was-
imaginative way, John.
You know,
It
and let me say
emerged
something about this
reality.
journal too. Is that, you know, having been a contributor, you know, that there's some. I was reading this Ireland, Mark Patrick Hedderman, the abbot of Glenstal Abbey in Ireland. He and his friend Richard Carney, and some others. You know, there's a great history of these journals that are kind of, yours isn't occasional; it's been annual, but these journals that they had one called the Crane Bag in Ireland, similar to your enterprise here, and you know, when people just feel inspired, they start a journal for a while. And I love the fact that you're not worrying about whether it goes for 10 years or 20 years or whatever. But again, this notion that we gathered, we wanted to do something practical, and Michael started a journal. It's kind of like this podcast. I also think too, Jonathan, in your essay in this edition of Jesus the Imagination about your Uncle Larry and Wu Wei, but you know, you say something so relevant to one of the themes of this, but you talk about, and even in your novel, you say the guy in the consciousness soul could be so into his head. But you make the distinction between people who think about things and things, right? You know, our thoughts about things and things. And that distance can be larger than the distance across this infinite space that drives me so nuts to tie it all together, right?
Yeah.
But if we can, and that's what I say, this John Cooper Powys, a transfer of reverence from religion to life. It's talking about that same journey we have to take from ideas about things or practical reasons. Yeah. Oh, I love him. He's my hero.
Yeah.
No,
I love it when people say his middle name correctly, which he did. So,
but I said more. It's Cooper, really, but I probably said a little more Cowper that first time. Okay, it's John Cooper Powys. Yeah,
John's
like
got
the poet,
philology
like William
down.
Cooper.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Poet is another Cooper with a W.
So speaking of Jesus' the Imagination,
give it a plug, Michael.
The plug. I mean, I don't know if you guys know, you've seen.
How do people get it? You've never said how people find it. Do they subscribe? Do they buy it in their local bookstore? What
you
do they
can
do?
buy it in local bookstores or get it through the Angelico Press website.
Mhm.
They will give you some links there. And well, here's the thing. So you guys have been on this journey with me for a while, right? You know, since Katie. Well, you were in the first edition, Mike, and
Yeah.
Katie. So it was Katie, and then Katie's been in a couple times. John's been in a few times. You've been in throughout the whole project. This one, as I write in the introduction, was more personal than I thought it was going to be when I announced the theme, which is flesh and spirit. I was thinking it was going to go more in a, I don't know, I hate the term, but creation spirituality kind of way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
John
So
just
but
put the link to Angelico
it
Press
didn't-
in there, by the way.
It ended up being a very heavy issue, especially for me, because when I announced it must have been May of 2021. We didn't know, but my wife had cancer of the uterus at this time, and I write about that in the introduction. So for me, it became very personal very quickly, and this idea of flesh and spirit, and what happened is many of the submissions that came in were also about this kind of heavy project, life and death stuff, including Therese Schroeder-Schreek, her essay that comes toward the end, which is,
It's wild, isn't it? Those snippets from her work with that dying patient. Wow.
It's when she sent it to me originally, I was I had to read it in parts because I was going through
I
this
photocopied
myself.
and gave it to a friend this morning.
I told her, I said, well, I'm kind of going through a thing right now. So it's kind of hard for me to take. And right after that, Christopher Bamford died. He was the editor and publisher at Steiner Books. He was long ago part of the Lindisfarne Association, and which is how I think Therese met him all these years ago. And I had been corresponding with Chris for a while. And in fact, at the very end of Jesus' Imagination is a translation from Novalis that he gave me maybe 2 years ago. and because he reached out to me looking for a publisher for his own work, and this was a man dying of cancer at the time, and then he died, I think, in May of this year, and so I decided we had to dedicate this one to Chris. And if anybody knows his work, I think his most important work is called An Endless Trace, which touches on a lot of the themes, and this is why I think he was attracted to my work when he found it.
Celtic spirituality is in there.
Celtic spirituality, the Rosary,
Novalis,
Novalis, yeah, and so that was, so it was interesting the way this one kind of mirrored my own life situation over the course of the year. So, and but I'm hoping the next one does too, because the next one's on a much happier topic.
What's the theme again?
The next year's theme is the household of things.
Oh yeah, the submissions due January 1st.
No, I changed it. I changed the cutoff date from the Feast of the Circumcision. Get it? Nobody got that joke. The cutoff date is January 1st.
I get it. I was thinking of when you first said it. I was thinking of flesh and spirit. I thought, yeah, no, but
it won't
the cutoff
be
date.
long now.
The cutoff
it
date,
won't be long now. That's what my dad said. Circumcision.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been living for a couple of years or more now through a crisis of flesh and spirit. It's just getting more acute and pronounced, and so probably not just you, Michael. Probably a lot of people.
I know, but
find the issue to be resonant, maybe even more than they might initially.
I think it ties back to something you said earlier too, Jonathan, about taking the whole
Mike, you broke up.
World. The the flesh and spirit is tied to that. That's sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
You're breaking up.
Don't listen for me. Yeah,
That's
you guys
better.
talk.
Well,
So anyway.
Can you hear me now? No. Yeah.
I probably had to go in a few minutes to release. My wife has to leave for work, and I had to take care of our sick son. But you might be coming through now, Mike.
That's better, Mike. Yeah.
Oh, it's nothing too important. Can you hear me or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay. No, it's just Jonathan. The flesh and spirit was echoed to me in something you said earlier, and I won't have the wording right, but that when we need to embrace, the whole world, that includes kind of the underworld, the totality of it, and that I think flesh and spirit gets at that, that we still, and I think in the snippet you read about Irish Christianity and American Christianity, there's a brilliant guy who lives in the American Southwest, Stephen Clarke, Clarke. And he's an anthroposophist, but he was studying like the Mexican mysteries, he called it. But between that and like maybe as a patron, Our Lady of Guadalupe, there could be a future, I keep on positing, that American Catholicism, that when Dostoevsky went to Europe and saw it was a beautiful graveyard, whatever's going on in Europe now. But the American civilization still is probably not to form, according to Spengler, for, a couple hundred years. But it'll be tied to the land, and its specialty might be formed in this, this connection with the underworld, So this kind of tepid American Catholicism you saw, or at least MacPhail did in comparison with Ireland. I'm still very optimistic with like works like Jesus the Imagination, what you're doing, that our Catholicism can be very pioneering in this way, with a strong connection to the body, a strong connection to the earth. Not everything about heaven, top down, divine feminine, bottom up, earth, matter. These are the themes. Yeah.
I would share that optimism to some extent. I mean, I was just at the Catholic Imagination Conference, and especially women of my generation, roughly,
absolutely,
are writing some wonderful things now. They're doing some great thinking about embodiment. So I think that's definitely true. Just a quick parting note, suitably dismal note, as I have to go, but the Irish, medieval Ireland was a wonderful place for visions of the underworld. I mean, the Irish have a fantastic imagination there's just so many crazy descriptions in Latin and in Irish of hell, visions of hell and purgatory, that I mean, we tend to assume these, oh, that's terrible, it's morbid, we can't, it's a good thing we're past that now, but it's not true at all. We absolutely need that.
We need to integrate it. Yeah.
Yeah, you cannot just have the superstructure. You have to have the underworld too, and everything that comes on with that, sense of the demonic. But yeah, I hate to end that.
I like it. Just like Jesus, the imagination ends on that note.
Yeah, I mean, it ties into the
wah, wah. Here's our new theme music. Wah, wah, wah.
Right. Well, no,
it is
well,
almost
no.
Halloween, right? It is almost All Saints and All Souls.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
why not?
So-
Why not?
So there were many things we could have talked about in Jesus' Imagination and in your novel, but I don't want to keep you too long, John. But I will say, available wherever fine books are sold, brothers and sisters.
Angelico Press.
Okay? Angelico Press and Slant Books, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
okay.
right. Yeah, Slant.
yeah. Website will have links to several places you can buy the novel online.
Okay.
so.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, John. It was
Much.
great talking to you. And by
Everybody,
the way,
thanks for listening. Yeah.
John, you're close by. My what do you call it? Juniper berry spruce twig metheglin will be bottled today.
There we go.
And last weekend I ran the still and we made pear brandy.
Both cures for colds.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
This will cure what ails you.
Well, thank you everybody for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We'll see you again next week.
Bye-bye.